Hello and welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, and a big thank you to all of you for the great response we had from our last show with a Wings reunion, celebrating Denny Lane's would-be 80th birthday. Thanks to all of you for all the kind comments, and especially to Steve Holly, Lawrence Juber, and Denny Sywell for being guests and sharing their memories of Denny Lane. This time out, we have a special guest, Ian Derbyshire, and he is from England. He has put out this book just recently, a few months ago, MACCA in the Long Noughties. And it goes into detail about Paul's music, his personal life, his touring, you name it, in the 90s and also, well, really the first decade of this century and a little bit more beyond that. And Ian, welcome to Ken Michaels Radio.
Yes, yes. Thanks for inviting me, and hope we can have a good show.
Why don't we just start by telling the folks about your background before you got to writing this book on Paul?
Yeah, in terms of music, obviously the Beatles have always been my sort of number one go-to group since the. Obviously, I wasn't the first generation Beatles, but I sort of got into Paul McCartney in about 72, 73, and around about time later they obviously released the Red and Blue albums, the Beatles albums, and he's not going back into that. But between 73 and 78, I think Paul McCartney was the number one, and actually, there's one time one of my favourite songs of his is "I Lie Around," which actually features sort of Denny Lane a lot on the vocals. And
Right.
I remember when I bought that one. It's almost like I dreamt it the night before. Before I was so deeply into it, I thought, oh, I've heard that song before, and I dreamt it the night before. So I was deeply into them. And then obviously, as you get a bit older, university and that, moved on to things like Bruce Springsteen became the next big artist that I followed. But I never left Paul McCartney. Got all his albums and singles throughout the period. But so my music collection now is about 4 or 5 thousand CDs. So obviously a large chunk is the Beatles, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, John Lennon, Ringo Starr. But there's a lot of other things: progressive music, world music, American West Coast music, and Brazilian music as well, and that sort of thing, African music. So, but then I think Paul McCartney, I think up to London Town, I think that was one of my last strong favorite albums of that period, the 70s and 80s. And the 80s, I know a lot of people, like some of the things, press to play and that sort of thing, but it was always a sort of 50-50 on those albums. Half the songs were very good, half were not quite not quite at the top rank for me. And then 1997, Flaming Pie, I think he sort of found his mojo again, really, a lot when he was immersed in the Beatles anthology project, and that he started thinking back to his early songs and that. And I think since then, obviously the reason for writing the book is cinematically, if you're going to do a film about Paul McCartney, there's two periods you would want to cover. One would be the end of the Beatles and building his early career, and obviously that's well covered in a lot of books already. But the second period is how he actually coped with the loss of Linda in 1998, and changes in the music industry, because he was no longer automatically getting played on the radio and that, and he was trying other musical directions, classical music, electronic music, and that sort of thing. And then this is the long noughties, is because it starts in 1998 and ends in 2009, so it covers the last couple of years of the 1990s. And during that period, he lost his first long-term wife, and then found new love, romance, became a father again in his early 60s. And then that marriage sort of fell apart after about 4 years, and quite a difficult divorce, and then he again found new love again with Nancy Shevell towards the end of the 2000s, and I think you find a lot of it reflected in his lyrics, really, because he's obviously Paul's not noted for necessarily being a reflective songwriter, but actually, if you do look at a lot of the lyrics from Flaming Pie onwards, they do tell you quite a bit about what was going on in his personal life, and so it's a fascinating period. And he obviously got back touring with his new band, which I saw a couple of weeks ago in Sao Paulo, and he was still going strong with this touring band.
Okay. First of all, there's a lot of things I want to bounce off what you just said, but I want to make sure I thank you because at the end of the book, you mention all these podcast shows that you listen to, and you mentioned things we said today, which I'm a part of, and Talk More Talk, and also my colleagues at Two Legs and Joe Mayo's podcast, and Fab Four Free for All. I was part of that show, and it was Fab Forum. So I just want to say thank you for the nod there to those podcasts and so many of the people that I work with.
Yeah.
Now, what you were saying there about Paul's post-Beatles career, um, I find, everybody's got different opinions about his music, and I'm a very big fan of Press to Play. I don't want to go deep into that because I've discussed that quite a lot, unless you do want to talk about it.
Yeah,
But
I'm a big fan of Eric Stewart, though, because I think he could have got much more out of his partnership with Eric Stewart. It was a bit sort of not fully realised, I don't think. The track Footprints, for example, is a standout track of that period, and it's just me. 10cc is one of my favourite post-Beatles bands, and that. So.
oh, okay. I should introduce you to Owen Lynn. He's a big
Yeah,
10cc fan. He's interviewed the members of 10cc.
yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you about Eric Stewart. I really wish Paul had continued writing with him because between that and some of the stuff like Tough on a Tightrope, I thought was a fantastic song. But Paul has been asked the question that do you write your best music after following something tragic or hardship? And within his career, you can talk about how the Beatle breakup was very difficult for him to handle. Um, I know been asked the question about Band on the Run since he had to do the album without Denny Sywell and Henry McCullough. Um, and also, obviously, John Lennon's death, Linda's death, George Harrison's death. Do you think, because Paul has said, well, he's kind of denied that he writes his best material after a tragedy or some kind of hardship like that. He'd hate to think that that's what inspires him to put out his best work. But do you think there's any truth to that when you take a look at, say, Band on the Run, or with the Beatle breakup? The first McCartney album, wasn't well received. It's far more respected now than it was then. But now everybody is loving and appreciating Ram so much. And then you can say Tug of War, the album after John died. Well, Flaming Pie was while Linda was still alive, but he was writing tremendous songs then on Flaming Pie. So he was dealing with Linda's illness. So you had all that going on. And for the people that really appreciate Driving Rain a lot, there's a lot of songs in there that are about losing Linda and moving on with Heather. So how do you feel about when people do say that when he's confronted with these personal hardships, that it makes him write his best work? Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, I think in this particular period, I think his first thing when he's has these hardships is he went into the studio when Linda was in her final months and with the Fireman project and that, and he just sort of uses music as a sort of almost like a therapy for himself, and produced that Rushes album, which I mean he wouldn't necessarily is his finest piece of work, but it is very reflective of his mood at the time. It's a very sort of as if somebody is passing away from the earth to another planet and that sort of thing. So that one, and then when he had his divorce proceedings, he did the Electric Arguments again with the Fireman Project to do that. So he does that sort of therapy. But then there are songs like um, Riding to Vanity Fair, for example, which are very much influenced by his, I think, personal circumstances at the time. And but there's also some of the songs, like one of my favourite Paul McCartney songs is "Loving Song," from the Venus and Mars album, and that's one he said just came to him, a song that came to him. So there's a lot of subconscious things going on. So it might not be immediately after the tragedy and that, but things will come out. There's a lot of Driving Rain is probably his most introspective album he's done there, but it includes songs about the first time he met Linda in the bar and music place in London, but he's also got songs about his new relationship with Heather Mills, and then he's got songs like Back in the Sunshine Again, which is again one of my favorite songs of the period, which was actually written in I think about 1996 or so. So when he was on holiday in Arizona with his son James and Linda. So it covers all sort of parts of his before Linda died, after she died, and then his new romance. So that particular album straddles all three periods.
Hmm.
And then Chaos and Creation is another one where you can see there's sort of problems in the marriage from some of the songs there, but then there's also sort of songs which are positive about Heather stepping out in front of him and being proud of him as his wife, really. So probably when he wrote songs like Let It Be and Hey Jude is obviously a response to John Lennon's son not being after the breakup of John Lennon's marriage and that. But Let It Be, I don't know, it sort of came many years later, really, after his mother's death.
Yeah. But, as I was saying, do you feel that his best work comes from the hardship? I mean, some of it is, but he's written so much great music spanning his entire career. Is it fair
Yeah.
to point that during those rough patches, that's when he's produced his best work, or just some of it?
Well, when he's up against the wall, like Band on the Run, when he was as you said, his first two albums, although Ram is my favorite Paul McCartney album, it wasn't really well received at the time. He was up, and the Wings Wildlife album was not a particularly great success. So when his back's against the wall, he will pull out all the stops and get things going. And again, it may be the same in terms of Chaos and Creation, really, because Driving Rain wasn't particularly well. Wasn't too badly received by critics, but it didn't actually sell very well. So then he thought, I'd better get in the studio and make a strong album again with Chaos and Creation and that. So I think he's obviously he's a fighter in terms of keeping himself musically towards the top of the tree, really, in that.
Hmm. Okay. Um, I wanted to, since you mentioned chaos and creation in the backyard, there's a comment you made in there about this never happened before, that you felt that it was like in the style of a Burt Bacharach song, which I
Yes,
and I love Burt Bacharach. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just I think I'm not sure. Was that the one when he wrote in the hotel room when he was thinking about um, he's missing Heather and that? But it is for me anyway. It's like something Burt Bacharach could have written that style of song, really.
oh, because she said it's reminiscent of "It Was a Very Good Year" from Frank Sinatra, which I
Frank Sinatra is well, yes, another one as well. Yes, yeah, yes, it's very close to that as well. Yeah.
okay. Huh. All right. Do you think that this particular period that you've written about, because you just went and said that this was an interesting time, he really stepped out and explored a lot of different music, the classical music, which was not entirely new to him. But, in the 90s, you had Liverpool Oratorio, you had Standing Stone, you had Ecce Cormeum. I hope I'm pronouncing Ecce right. or is it Ecce Cormea?
Yes.
Um, Later on, you had you had Working Classical and um, Ocean's Kingdom, which was 2011. You had major pieces of work there, as opposed to individual songs like Yesterday and Eleanor Rigby. And you also had all the experimental stuff with the Fireman. He allowed himself to work on the Twin Freaks release, although that was really a DJ putting that all together.
Yeah.
Do you find this particular period to be his most exciting and most creative? Or do you look back at the 70s when commercially he was selling the best, putting out more pop albums, whereas in the 90s he was spreading himself out between pop and classical and the Firemen and all this other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, but the big difference was, I think, by the 1990s, he was becoming to obviously he was becoming more mature, but he's also coming to realise that the music radio stations weren't playing his new songs and that automatically, and he started in the 90s branching out into classical areas and experimental areas, and I think this decade he has enormous energy really in terms of being able to devote time to because the Ecce was Ecce Core Mayhem, that was really something almost like a project in memory of Linda as well, really, although it never got released till towards the end of the decade, but Linda was in the early meetings about doing that particular thing. So I mean I think he's a bit schizophrenic artist to some extent, Paul McCartney, because when he does live shows, he always wants to play all the hits. When
Hmm.
he in the this is why I think the 1980s, I have the criticisms of him. He was still trying to go for the hits too much rather than by the 90s. I think he realised that he could actually sort of become more of a mature artist and put out songs which were not necessarily pop rock, although Memory Almost Full is quite a solid pop rock album and that. But he exposed himself to artists for painting and other artists, and it's just the full flowering of Paul McCartney as a musician, artist, and also sort of we call him political activist, activist for environmental causes um, and peace causes during the this decade. And I think since that decade, he has maybe sort of moved away from that since Ocean's Kingdom, and that he tried to sort of with new and that become more pop orientated and linking up with his new producers and that. But I personally prefer what he was doing in this decade between 98 and 2009 in terms of the full diversity of his musical output.
Very interesting. I like the way you're looking at it. I made a comment on Talk More Talk just recently that I felt that, yeah, Paul, for most of his career, cared about his record sales. He wouldn't want any of his albums to be a flop, but I think he cares less these days about it. I mean, if it has a strong showing initially, he's happy with that. I think he's very content with all that he's achieved in his career. I think some fans probably feel he shouldn't be trying to go for the hits. But then there are people who might look at the fact that, let's face it, ever since working with George Martin, he's worked with the hottest producers of the time: Hugh Padgham, Bob Clearmountain, Jeff Lynne a bit on Flaming Pie, David Kahn, Nigel Godrich, um, you name it, Mark Ronson, all these big names. So it would lead you to think, well, maybe he's trying to sound contemporary. He wants to be hip. He wants to be acknowledged by a younger audience. How do you look at that? Or do you just think he's caring about putting out really good product and trying to maybe learn something from younger, fresh talent in the producers that he's working with?
Yeah, I think that was applied to some extent in the 1980s and the 2010s really with the new album, and where he did have three different younger producers and that. And personally, I mean, I think I'd love to see him work with somebody like Rick Rubin, one of these type of producers who worked with Johnny Cash and that type of thing, who would you get a really interesting album from Paul doing something like that. This is why Nigel Godrich was an interesting one, because although he's a younger producer, he's not really a pop producer. He was really with Radiohead, and he's more known for the sort of sonic landscape he produces with all his tape loops and things like that. And I think that was an interesting experiment, but maybe I think it was really quite difficult for Paul, because he really pushed him a lot on some of the songs and that, and they almost broke up, I think, at one stage in that. But the actual final output was a very strong album.
Oh
But
yeah.
I actually like what he did with David Kahn, really, because they David Kahn actually put together what is basically his current touring band that it's lasted 2 decades. So he obviously had an eye for some good musicians to work with Paul, and I think he learned from his Driving Rain, because the problem with that album was 67 minutes, and it should have been sort of cut down a little bit towards 50 minutes less. And so Memory Almost Full is actually my favorite album of this entire period, because he actually, it's a sort of pop rock Paul with some outstanding songs like Mr. Bellamy, another 10cc type song. House of Wax is a song a lot of people wouldn't associate with Paul, because when I played it a few days ago, my wife said, "Who's that on the guitar?" And she didn't believe it was Paul McCartney in that. And then there's some of them have there's almost like earworms. Some of the tracks on the albums, you can't get them out of your head, really. Some of the choruses. So I would say that album is maybe one song, Gratitude, is a bit average, but apart from that, I think the rest of the songs are top notch, really.
I feel like you've been listening to some of the podcasts I was in, because Gratitude is one of the few songs from Paul that I haven't cared for. But I love everything else on Chaos
Yeah.
and Creation in the Backyard. It's interesting because you mentioned both Chaos and Creation and Memory Almost Full, and you mentioned Radiohead, and I didn't realize that I knew Paul had contacted Tom York to try to write with him, and I didn't know that it was to help him out with Mr. Bellamy.
No,
That's
no,
a
because he basically said that he's not really a sophisticated enough piano player to play the part, and I mean, obviously, it's not the style of song you would expect Tom York to be involved in. Maybe Eric Stewart would have been a better one for that particular song.
But it's interesting because I don't know if Paul is a big fan of Radiohead, but the mere fact that he would ask,
I think it's likely to be his son James, really, because again, during this period with the Flaming Pie, James got involved in a few songs, and on Driving Rain, again,
yeah.
Back in the Sunshine again on that. And James was a big fan of Radiohead, and also some of the grungy type music. So he must have introduced Paul must have heard it in the household and that. And obviously Radiohead were one of the big artists of that period, really. It's in the group. I've always found it difficult to get fully into Radiohead. I prefer their earlier stuff, and the more recent, is it called Smile? Is it the project they've done since Radiohead? That's much more accessible than some of the acclaimed albums. But they were probably in about 2000, 2001. They were amongst the top 2 or 3 groups in the world at the time, I think.
Hmm. I like a lot of their stuff,
Yeah.
but I don't know their full catalog. So I certainly think it's worth,
Yeah.
exploring.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about Memory Almost Full in a few moments. But you did
Yeah.
say, as far as Chaos and Creation, I wasn't aware that there were these unreleased songs that Paul had worked on. I'm sure there's always unreleased songs. One called Watching My Fish Drown. A Modern Dance, and Perfect Lover. Where did you find out this information?
Yeah, I think it's one of the guitarists. Whether it was Brian Ray, I think, or I think it because obviously when they release these albums, there's a lot of interviews going on, and they mention, oh yes, Paul was also working on. We were also worked on these tracks, and that sounded a bit like a railway train or something, something like that. And they give names. Obviously, some of the names might not be the same names as Paul has got written down. They were tracks they were working on in the studio and never made it onto the album. Yeah.
Yeah, just wonder if the day ever comes, if there's an archival release of Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. I know a lot of people are waiting for London Town and Back to the Egg, but if they ever get more recent, uh, be nice to hear these other songs.
Yeah, I just wonder in terms of Paul's own memories of this period, whether it's a period he might want to, because there were so many personal problems in terms of his life, whether it's not the first period he's going to go back to for archival releases. But Chaos and Creation is a possibility because it was such an acclaimed album at the time, and a lot of things actually memory always fall. A lot of things they were working on in the at the start of Chaos and Creation, so they actually predated Chaos and Creation.
Yep, that's true. All right, so Memory Almost Full. There is a writer who was in Record Collector, and we did a show on the Record Collector issue that was all devoted to solo McCartney. There's a writer who called Memory Almost Full Paul's best solo album, and that was David Quantick, his greatest solo album. And you say it's McCartney's standout album of the 2000s, one that could be ranked among his best alongside Ram, Ben on the Run, Tug of War, and Flaming Pie. Why do you feel that way? I love
Yeah,
Memory Almost Full, don't get me wrong, but
yeah. I mean, it was an album I was always put off by the cover really because I mean once you you see the cover of this armchair, you think oh it's going to be a sort of quite boring elderly Paul, but it's the album is if you just look at the whole tracks on the album. Apart from was it Gratitude? Was that the one on the album? Apart from that one, they're all I would say sort of some of them are 9 out of 10, lot of them are 8 out of 10, and it's just that it, in Chaos and Creation, you have to be in the mood really to listen to that album. Really, it's a bit like some sort of John Lennon's his
Plastic Ono Band.
Plastic Ono Band album, or something like George Harrison's Living in the Material World, and that because it also a lot of it depends on the sound system you're using. Really, I mean, if you've got a very good sound system, you can hear all the different these different touches the producers put in with all these different unusual instruments and that. Whereas Memory Almost Full is a straight out sort of pop rock album really, and it starts off with Dance Tonight, which is still in his live catalogue and that, and it moves through to I have to see actually what the track listing is here. I got it written down somewhere, but House of Wax is one of my favourite later songs. Mr. Bellamy is that's another very complex song really, because it goes into 3 or 4 different musical movements and that, and the lyrics are quite again it could be autobiographical, that particular song. You know, he's somebody on the top of a building, wants to be away from everyone and people trying to talk him down and that, and I think he's denied it was about the state of his relations with Heather Mills and that, but you could interpret it as a song about that, getting away from that situation. And the other tracks,
See You Sunshine.
See Your Sunshine. That's a positive one about Heather in terms of we're walking out in front of him and being proud of that. But there's Ever Present Past. That's the one. I can't get it out of my head the last few days. In that, that's the chorus on that one
Once that song
is
is in your head, it
yes.
just stays there.
And Only Mama Knows is that's one of his of this period. He did, because he had Fine Line was this, I suppose, the most upbeat one on Chaos and Creation, but that was a bit plodding compared to Only Mama Knows. He's sort of into his screaming vocals on that particular one. So I can't really see. You Tell Me is sort of a ballad, reflective ballad on the
Mhm.
album, and then he's got his sweet at the end of, because obviously sometimes Abbey Road suite works very well. This suite where he's reflecting back on his past and that with vintage clothes, that was me, and that works together very well. And so I mean, I think it's for me, it's got few flaws really in the album, and I
Hmm.
would put it in my top five of his albums. I actually put Venus and Mars much higher up on the list now, but I would put it within the top five of Ram, Venus and Mars, and, maybe Flaming Pie, and Band on the Run, because Band on the Run is a great album, but it does have some tracks which, Mammonia, uh, and the Picasso's song
Last words.
"Last Words" are. I mean, I wouldn't say they're sort of average, I would say, particularly in terms of Paul's output. But whereas this one and something like Venus and Mars are very strong throughout the entire album.
I always love hearing people's opinions about his albums. And before I get back to these songs from Memory Almost Full, Ram is your favorite McCartney album?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean that's by far yes, yeah.
Has it always
Ram
been
is
that way?
it has actually, yeah. It's always because it's such a almost a spontaneous album, really. Like something like Monkberry Moon Delight is uh, is a sort of album. It's almost like he's making it up live as he's going along, really, in that. And then Backseat of My Car's another one, and again, I mean, that particular album, I don't think there are any weak tracks on it, really. So that particular album, and London Town is another favourite of mine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
No, I find it fascinating how Ram has become, for a lot of people, their favorite McCartney album, surpassing Band on the Run. Tug of War is always rated highly and everything. And I've also noticed in recent years how Venus and Mars has gone up in people's, uh, appreciation. Some people actually like Venus and Mars more than Band on the Run.
Yeah, I think I would be in that camp now or something. Yes. Although I did like the Band on the Run when they did the recent release of the sort of alternative tracks, or the sort of
Yeah,
the
under
without under mixed ones. I quite like that version as well. So you have two Band on the Runners now to play. So that's
yeah.
good.
Well, we're living at a time when people are liking less produced recordings and demos and alternate takes, and maybe they don't want as much polish as the original versions had, or slickness. So that's fine. It's kind of refreshing to hear all these different versions that have come out.
Yeah. That was one of the problems with the 1980s albums. Really, they were sort of slightly overproduced. Really, I mean, Press to Play has some great songs on it, but some of them a bit overproduced. And Flowers in the Dirt again has the is it Motor of Love is a bit sort of it's
Hmm.
a bit super produced, that particular track, and that's so
Okay.
again, yeah. But I think that's one of your favorites. Is that one of your favorites?
That's my number one McCartney album.
No, oh, right. Yeah.
Number one's Flowers. Number two is Press to Play.
No, no, because I do have a great fan of Elvis Costello. I have all his
Yeah.
catalogue and that. So it's just a pity they didn't put it all on one album, did they? Really,
Oh,
some of it went on his albums, and some of them never got released or anything like that.
I guess they felt that it would benefit both of them if they just shared the songs and
Yeah,
you had to buy the others' albums in order to get everything.
yeah,
But yeah, those great collaborations, Paul. between Eric Stewart and Elvis Costello and Denny Lane. Um,
Yes, because that's
going,
another interesting thing of this period. He does these sort of one-off tracks for for example, the Ian Jury.
oh yeah,
When he died, he did his own version of a Ian Jury song, and there's a lot of small songs there. One he did with Nitin Sawhney, which was his own song about Heather. Beyond the albums themselves, there are a lot of other tracks. I think this is why the book's called Tracks, really, because it mentions all these other tracks that never actually got released in albums, but are on other people's albums.
yeah, yep. And Memory Almost Full, I wanted to just return to that because See You Sunshine, something that I wasn't aware of, was that Nigel Godrich turned that song down.
Yes, I think you must have turned several of these songs down because you see they actually started the band himself working on about three or four songs before Nigel Godrich got involved. So
Okay.
presumably those songs were turned down, which never, they also got later on onto Memory Almost Full. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of Paul's best bass playing is on See You Sunshine. He lets loose on that one.
Yes, that's actually another thing in terms of Driving Rain. There's some of the tracks on there. This bass playing is really visible and impressive, really.
Hmm. Tell me what you think of The End of the End. So I think that song is an absolute masterpiece, and I think it's one of the best songs he's ever written, including the Beatles.
Yes, but I suppose it's based on the Irish sort of idea of when people die, you get round and people sort of celebrate it really and think about all their happy memories of somebody in their life. So I could see that. I think I'm not quite sure in terms of the melody in that. It's not that strong a sort of a melody on it, but it would have been a good way to end the album. Really, I don't think they necessarily needed to um, to have a following track to lift the gloom really on that.
Yeah, well, kind of like Her Majesty did.
Yes, yeah,
You
but that was a bit short, I think.
know.
Yeah,
But the end of the end, because of its bareness and it's just Paul on the piano there and um, a little bit of orchestration,
yes,
kind of understated the orchestration, not a full blown production, and the whistling in the middle really has, kind of like it reminds me when it's stripped down to something like that, just a few instruments. Um,
but it
kind
shows
of like,
actually Dave. It
what's
shows
that?
David. It shows David Kahn was actually a good fit for Paul as a producer, really, because he's I think that this particular album they worked well together, and it's a pity they haven't continued to make further work together, really.
He's producing James.
Yes, yes,
But yeah, I love all the producers that Paul's worked with. But between Driving Rain and Memory Almost Full, I think those are two really strong albums there. And I kind of wish he'd go back with David Kahn. I kind of wish he'd return with Nigel Godrich. Nigel Godrich, when he worked on Chaos and Creation, it had more of a first McCartney album feel, more simple production, you know. I don't want to say demo-ish in any way, but it had like a simple feel to it, not a big full-blown production. A lot of
yeah,
people, and Paul played most of the instruments on
yeah.
Chaos and Creation. Um, so to me, it was more a return to that, and I think Nigel was looking for that.
Yeah, but the Riding to Vanity Fair is the one where they actually spend a lot of time over. But the actual the final version, it's quite a probably it's the outstanding track on that particular album, in my opinion. And it is a very again it's an unusual track for Paul. Really, it's not really typical of his catalogue. And this is quite a lot of the songs are from Driving Rain and Chaos and Creation, and not typical Paul McCartney songs of it. He's trying moving into different pastures, I think. Really.
Yeah, the far more personal.
Yeah,
He's taking more time on certain songs with his lyrics
yeah,
and very poetic.
Yeah, and Jenny Wren, that's another outstanding one, which it seems to be about Heather really in terms of the lyrics and that. But apparently he took a break from he was in California. He drove into the desert into a place with his guitar and composed it there and came back and finished it off that evening really. So it's amazing, really. Isn't it?
It's kind of like Some Days.
Yes,
It was written really quickly.
yeah,
I think while
and
Linda was in the hospital, like he wanted to prove to himself, he
yeah,
had an hour to kill. Let me write a song. And he comes,
yeah. And Vanilla Sky is another one where I think the producer was it Cameron Crowe said he wasn't really keen with the songs he'd been provided with as potential ones, and so Paul went at that evening and just something he saw in the restaurant set him off and wrote this new song for the next day. Really, so it's incredible gift, really.
that's a brilliant one. That could have ended up on the White Album.
Yeah, yeah.
One of his acoustic gems right there. How big a fan are you of classical music?
Well, no, I wouldn't say. I mean, I do have classical music in my collection. It's just when I was at university at the time they used to buy this magazine once a week, and they give you a book about about the artist, sort of Chopin or something like that, and a tape or CD of his work. So I've got pretty good coverage of most classical music through that collection. Really, it's a great composers collection, and but apart from that, I don't actually play it too frequently. I mean, uh, but so I mean, in terms of Paul McCartney's classical music, something like Ecce Cor Meum is pleasant to listen to, but it's not really sort of Carmina Burana or Handel's Messiah, is it really? If you are looking to listen to something like that, probably go for those first. Whereas I think the working classical one, he redos some of his songs. I actually prefer the new ones he puts in really on the, on that particular album rather than sometimes it works some of his older songs because that was memorial for Linda really because a lot of the songs he was selecting were ones associated with Linda and that, and so he put orchestral arrangements which could be played in church while people were having memorials for Linda and that. But I wouldn't say I think Allan Kozinn is he's the classical expert in terms of that sort of thing. But I mean, Paul he does it's a pretty good melodies in some of them really. I mean, I think the um, is I would say the Ecce Cor Meum is pretty impressive. There's a small sort of section in the middle where it's doesn't have the singing and that, and that's very good. But I think he found himself that he didn't realise he was putting too much pressure on the voices of these choir boys and that, and they couldn't actually stand more than sort of 20 minutes of singing. So he had to rewrite quite a bit of it to accommodate that for the final version.
Hmm. Do you find yourself ever going back and listening to his classical work? Do you find any of it more accessible than the others?
Um, I think sometimes the Liverpool Oratorio, sometimes listen to that, and it's more sort of background music while you're working, really, and that rather than something you would. Because some classical music you have to put your full attention to, and whereas I think probably in the case of some of the Paul McCartney's ones, it's probably in its setting. If it was in a church setting, it would be much more impressive than having it at home. Really, it's rather like the Liverpool sound collage. It's not sort of thing you'd listen to in home, but in an art gallery, it might work quite well. Really, in that.
Right. Because for me, the oratorio is the most accessible. Although
Yeah.
I do find some of Ocean's Kingdom to be that way too. And there
Yeah,
was
Ocean's Kingdom is the best I think. Yeah.
there's one movement which is very much it sounds a bit like West Side Story to me, and I don't know if he was influenced by that. I'm sure he's very familiar with the music of of that
Yeah,
play.
yeah, lot of them are sort of the American composers of the sort of early 20th century, aren't they? Really, I think he's quite influenced by that and the pieces he added onto the um, working classical when he put things like Spiral in,
Yeah.
and those they were influenced by those American composers, I think. Yeah.
Hmm. How do you feel about the music? Well, Tuesday is in there in working classical, and Tuesday was used in one of Paul's animated films, just like We All Stand Together was and Tropic Island Hum, you know. I think that's a gorgeous piece of music by itself. It's nice to have these little extras in there. They're not a full,
Yeah,
it's not like an oratorio, a major piece of work, but they're long pieces of one
yeah,
song or whatever.
yeah. It's like his instrumental on. It didn't actually get on Memory Almost Full, but it got on the bonus one. It's called 222.
Right.
Is one I think he's used that actually on quite a few other things in terms of it's been a B-side, but he's also used it on some sort of videos as well on that. And I mean, there's so many of these little instrumentals which maybe you could get together a Paul McCartney instrumental album some stage, put them all together, and that would be another good seller.
Yeah. Can you tell us anything? I know you go into it somewhat in your book about the guitar concerto that Paul worked on with Carlos Bonell. They spent it was a period of like a year or 2 years on this, and yet it's never seen the light of day.
No, that's one. Is that the one where actually Jeff Beck got involved at some stage on that later on? I think I read that Jeff Beck did something on that, but it never got released as well. There's been a few newspaper articles, mainly from Carlos. Is it Bonelli, Bonell, um, which obviously they spent quite a bit of time on, but it's not quite clear why it has never been released. But I did see that something that Jeff Beck had some involvement in it as well, because I think he was asked to play it actually, and he was asked he played a version of it, I think.
Oh, I would love to hear that.
Yeah,
And Carlos's version.
yeah, so
Uh, it's fascinating and frustrating at the same time that there's all this unreleased stuff that you want to hear. There's also a piece I'm aware of called Stately Horn, which
I
is
know
all just brass.
no,
And
I've
he
not heard of that one. No, no.
Yeah.
It's like the Return to Pepperland stuff. There's one called album called Pizzas and something, Pizzas and
Pizza and Fairy
Fairies. Yeah, it's got some tracks like Lindiana and Love Come Tumbling Down. I think
Right.
that has been released, but some of those tracks are very strong, and it's a shame they've never come out yet. But
Well, time-wise, it would make the most sense. Since it wasn't included on the Flowers in the Dirt archival release, that would really fit with Press to Play.
yeah,
These songs that he worked on with Phil Ramone, and Lindiana was with David Foster.
yeah. I mean, it could be one of the problems with Paul is in terms of it comes when he's selecting singles to release off his album. I mean, for example, he released Fine Line of Chaos and Creation, and I mean, I don't think is going to be a hit. But I think if he'd have released something like Jenny Wren or something like as his first sort of single on the album, or even Riding to Vanity Fair, something different, it could actually hit the market rather than going for an obvious sort of upbeat single like that.
Well, it's a complicated thing. Yeah, I have a long radio background, and it's tough to explain why certain records do well and others don't. But since the music industry is a youth-driven industry, most of what gets played on the radio is aimed towards a younger demographic. And if the idea is that Paul McCartney and any veteran artist of his age isn't attracting those people, if they don't really care about his music, and the majority of people who do are much older. They're probably going to know about a new album and they're going to get it within a few weeks and the album's going to die. So because that music isn't aimed at a young audience that make up, the bulk of record sales, whether it's physical or digital, then it's not going to do well. Most artists, when they reach a certain age, they just don't get played at all, and it's a shame because some artists, I'm not just saying Paul, some artists put out some of their best material in their older age, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You were just saying, because most of Paul's albums from Flaming Pie on have gotten really good reviews critically.
Yeah,
Even
it's
Drive,
not people like
yeah,
David Crosby. He that died recently, but his last 10 years, he was putting out some of his strongest material really in that. But it never really got much played really, beyond the small coterie of his diehard fans and that.
yeah. Well, there's only a few formats of radio that will play a new album from a veteran artist,
Yeah,
even with something like the Rolling Stones when they put out
yeah,
Happy Diamonds. It's just this is what normally happens. They get airplay on certain radio stations that will play heritage rockers like the Stones or Paul for a couple of weeks, and that's it.
yeah. This is why obviously after this period he started linking up with Jay-Z and all these other artists too, and then the McCartney Three reimagined. He brought all these younger artists doing versions of his song just to give more relevance, I suppose, to his
I
trying
suppose.
to. But actually, when I saw the concert in Sao Paulo a couple of weeks ago, there's quite a lot of young people in the audience, really. So I was quite surprised that it's still it appeals to a lot of them were going for Beatles songs and that sort of thing. But it does still attract a lot of younger people in here.
Well, if you're listening to oldie stations that still play 60s,
Mm.
and many of them don't anymore, a lot of them, even they're trimming the 70s playlist. It's like the 80s on up. But if you're fortunate to find radio stations, whether it's on your FM dial or whether it's through internet radio or whatever, um, if you find stations that play the Beatles, young people are finding the music somehow, maybe through their parents and grandparents or family members or friends. And, we're still fortunately getting young Beatle fans. And hopefully some of them are finding out about the solo music too. And I
Yeah,
also feel, this is just, my personal opinion, when certain songs are covered, like Guns N' Roses covering Live and Let Die, that helps to, make younger people aware of that song who didn't know Paul McCartney did it first with Wings.
yeah.
Or
Because was it Blackbird? And Blackbird was covered. Was it
yeah,
Beyonce? Was it? Yeah. So
I think Come Together is one of the it's like the second most streamed Beatles song, I think, behind Well, Here Comes the Sun. Yeah, I think it's the second most streamed song. And it's the number one Beatles song on classic rock radio. And I do think that the fact that Aerosmith covered it helped the song because that version got a lot of airplay too. I'm not taking
yeah,
anything away from the Beatles version or Paul's version of Live and Let Die, but when a new audience, a younger audience gets to hear this, then hopefully they discover the original versions.
yeah. So, but I think we're just seeing people walking around casually along the beach with Beatles T-shirts and that. It just shows that they're still a worldwide brand, really, in terms of music awareness.
That's great. I'm so happy that that's
Yeah,
happening right now, and
yeah,
hopefully will always happen.
yeah,
Tell me about your thoughts about the Fireman, because we have
yeah.
three albums. They couldn't be more different from each other in a way.
No, the first Fireman album I've not really listened to too much because it's basically sort of reworkings of some songs from was it Off the Ground album? I think was it Off
Uh-huh.
the Ground album. Whereas the second one was actually they were in my view a lot of the songs sound a bit like almost like Mike Oldfield. You know, Mike Oldfield's
Yeah,
guitar tone, and that he's almost got his Mike Oldfield guitar tone, or also Genesis type guitar tone. And I quite like the Rush's album, although it's a bit it's a bit samey in places. I mean, there's lot of it, but there's one called is it Water. Uh, um, was
Watercolor.
it Watercolor Guitars? That
Mhm.
is a very nice riff, and the main riff again there. So if I was I'd actually listening to music rather than a Paul McCartney classical one, I would put Rushes on as a nice music to listen while you're at the beach. There's something like that, listening to the waves going around. Then when he moved on to the electric arguments one, it's a completely different sort of
Mm.
approach, really. I think he was, again, both were written in the stages of where he was in difficult personal situation, but he, I think he was working with the producer was at Youth, and it basically almost like doing a Brian Eno role in producing, giving him a bit of direction into why don't you try this type of rhythm and beat and try these instruments, and Paul would work away at that. And then if he needs lyrics, there were a few beat poet books around in his Hog Hill studio for randomly pick out lyrics, and I think they produced like one song a day. So there obviously are some songs still missing which have never been um, fully released and that, but it is a different one in terms of he's got lyrics on the first half of the album, and some of them are quite upbeat, maybe reflecting his relationship with Nancy Chevelle, and I think they travelled across United States together in some um, along the Route 66 and that to
Right.
get to know each another. And so the first half of it is almost like a new Paul McCartney album, although it's a bit sort of not fully produced because they could have worked on the songs a bit more to get even more out of them. Whereas the second half, I find is a bit more like Rushes too, really. A lot of instrumental, reflective, meditative ones. But he's got some very good reviews in terms of the music press. Some people some people thought it's his strongest album of the whole period, really, because he's not afraid to try new things, really, which is a bit of a, as I say, a bit of a schizophrenic thing about Paul McCartney. Is although he goes for the popularity in his concerts and that, and he is willing at times to just go and try something completely out of the ordinary, really. And electric arguments, I think, is is quite a triumph, really. And
Yeah,
what's your views on the album? Is it?
I think a lot of people enjoy it because some fans prefer it when Paul just does whatever he feels like doing. It could be something spontaneous when he's not trying too hard to have a hit record or to have a very popular album. He does whatever he feels in his heart. And the great thing about Electric Arguments, like you were saying, I think that it took him over a year to record the album. They would do one song a day, one a month, something like that. And they go back to the studio each month. And so he would create something from scratch with Youth, from a line wherever he gets it from, um, and just build around that. And so that's another way of creating songs. And in some ways, it's not too far removed from the more experimental stuff that he was doing on Press to Play or McCartney 2, or even Driving Rain. When I hear songs like Pretty Little Head or Talk More Talk, or Spinning on an Axis, or all the stuff that he would do on McCartney 2, A Secret Friend or Check My Machine, those kind of tracks. Um, the real spacey stuff, the ethereal stuff that he does on Electric Arguments, to me harkens back to that. So it's more of a continuation of what he was
Yeah.
doing before.
But it's also a bit like he did more recently on McCartney 3, really, in terms of some of the, for example, Deep Feeling
Yeah.
is my favorite track on that album. And again, it could have been a sort of fireman type track because again, that's sort of experimenting in different soundscapes and that. And McCartney too, he did some quite experimental electronic music as well. So I suppose he might have finished doing it with the Firemen, but he's still continuing in. And maybe there's going to be a McCartney 4 coming out. I don't know. We might see a bit further than that.
We had to wait 40 years for McCartney
Yes,
3. So
yes.
who knows? But it
Yeah.
makes me wonder sometimes when Paul is completely on his own, when he's either playing all the instruments or he's got one partner in Youth on the Fireman albums, or something like Chaos and Creation, where it's almost all him. Do you think in some ways he's just uninhibited and it makes him create or be more creative than if he was in a band environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think he does sort of try new things, which I suppose I don't know whether the Beatles' White Album was it because they whether the Beatles were doing things a bit more on their own there, and he starts doing a lot of different types of songs from the Beatles songs. But I think it was particularly when he was in Wings, there was a lot of pressure to be a band there, whereas now I think with his new band, it's he can work with them if he wants on a track, or he can not work with them. And there, so he's in a. I mean, to some extent, it's a more environment where he can take chances. Whereas I think the band people might sort of say, "Oh no, we don't like that direction" or something like that. And whereas now he's either only himself or one producer to divert him from his experimental ways.
Mm. So do you think, and to me, I think it's an obvious question, but you may feel differently. Do the producers on Paul's albums, are they far more an influence in his music than the musicians that he works with?
Um, I think George Martin certainly was, because obviously Tug of War was quite a change from. I mean, you notice it's almost like sort of Beatles 2 really with that album and the whole production and the style of it. But I mean, some producer, I think David Kahn is not really made a major. He will add a few sort of different sounds to the album, but he's more of a facilitator producer. Whereas the obviously Nigel Godrich is a sort of producer who will put his own stamp on the album. And again, I think the in George Martin, George Martin's son, he's probably more of a hands-off producer than his father really. So Paul can do their. Whereas some of these other modern producers, they like to add their electronic bits in, which I'm sure wouldn't be there but for the producer really.
Uh-huh.
So it depends on the producer really. But I mean, some of the Run Devil Run album was produced. Was it Chris Thomas
Chris
did
Thomas.
that, and he did a very good job on that. Whereas his previous one was, I don't know, it wasn't didn't really sort of fit
Back to
too
the
well.
egg.
Back to the Egg. I mean, it's not a personal favourite of mine, that one. I think he was trying trying maybe to catch up with the punk movement at the time of there. But again, it'd be better if Paul just remained Paul and did what he did rather than trying to chase musical trends. Really.
Yeah, well, you're not alone in that opinion. There are a lot of people who feel that they wish that Paul wasn't trying to have a hit record for a good part of his career and latch on to, I don't want to call it the flavor of the month, because all these people who are producers for him, whether you consider them facilitators or whatever you want to call them, they were the hot names of the time, and Flowers in the Dirt, you had a lot of people there. You had like three or four key producers at the time, Trevor Horn, you know.
Yes, Trevor Horn. He's another producer who will leave his stamp on, because I love the Yes music and some of the Bugle stuff, but he definitely leaves his stamp on the music, and that. And
And you don't like that.
no, I do like it actually, because he did an album with Yes called Drama, which
Right.
is actually one of their strongest sort of classic Yes period albums really. And but you will know he's produced the album and that.
Hmm. Since you mentioned it earlier, there are just a few one-offs that I want to talk about that are mentioned in your book. Um, One of them is the collaboration with Yusuf Islam, better known as Cat Stevens, and Dolly Parton when they did Boots and Sand, which was on Yusuf's album at the time. How did that happen? Do you have any idea? Was Paul friends already with Cat Stevens?
I mean, obviously he knows Cat Stevens from the 1960s, 70s period of that. But I think actually Cat Stevens more because he'd gone out of favor a lot, hadn't he? Really, and it was to help Cat Stevens get get more back into the music business because he became Yusuf Islam and had sort of moved away from mainstream music, and then he's since about this period he's come back and produced a lot of albums really. So I think it was to do with need to look at the details of it, but there was something there was also some almost like some charity involved. They were supporting, I think, to do with this particular one, to do with some race type issues, immigration issues, in America or something like that. It's something to do with that, I think. But
Yeah.
but since then, Cat Stevens has actually produced quite a few. His old albums have been. He's done new versions of some of them, and he's become quite active again now over recent years.
Yeah. Well, he was a favorite of mine in the 70s, definitely.
Yes, yeah.
In my high
Yeah,
school,
he's
you couldn't go anywhere without hearing Cat Stevens and
one of the most successful artists at his peak, and then he suddenly gave it all up, didn't he? Really?
yeah, well, sometimes if you have just a handful of real classic songs, that's enough for some people. I mean,
Yeah,
Father and Son and Peace Train are incredible songs. Wild World gets covered all the time.
yeah.
But and then Dolly Parton was on that recording too. And she also made the record of Let It Be with Paul and Ringo. So it's not like it's the first time Dolly's worked with a Beatle.
No, no. I mean, obviously, the recent one is almost like a um, some because she had this thing in terms of the awarded the rock Hall of Fame thing, and
Yeah.
she wanted to prove she was a real rock artist, and I think she's done quite a good album actually. That one. Have you heard the album, the Dolly
I've heard
Parton
some
one?
cuts from it,
Yes,
especially the song with when they do Magic Man with Ann Wilson. That's
yes.
fantastic.
But she's actually does rock vocals quite well actually. But I've always liked Dolly Parton's Jolene. That's a song. That's one.
Classic.
Yes.
You mentioned Nitin Sawhney before with My Soul. How did that happen? How did Paul get to meet him?
Yeah. Well, around about that time, because Nitin Sawhney is sort of in the London music scene, and he's already issued a couple of albums which had won awards in the British music press for new artists and that. And he was looking for somebody to remix some of the Rush's tracks and that, and Nitin Sawhney. Because he's also done, although he's quite a multi instrumentalist, he's also quite good at doing these remixes and splicing things together and that sort of thing. So they got to know each other. I think Nitin invited him to his sort of he had a small apartment in London and that, and they bonded over the shared sort of interests because was it Rabindranath Tagore was somebody Paul McCartney referred to in the Pipes to Peace album, some of the lyrics from him, and they discussed a bit of that, and he did these remixes on the Rush's album, which obviously aren't particularly widely available, but you can get them on the available on the YouTube if you want to listen to those. And he sort of added a bit more of a Indian type and a more electronic vibe to it, and then he became because Paul he lives a lot in when he's in England. He has this big Sussex a house with lots of buildings, farm type thing, and he does invite some of his. He doesn't really get Paul doesn't go too much in big meals in London meeting people, but he'll invite a few people, David Gilmour and these type of people to dinner parties and that. And Nitin Sawhney became one of his guests there, and also attended the wedding when they got married in Ireland. And then when he released his a later album, Nitin Sawhney, London Undersound, Paul contributed this one song, which is actually have you heard it? Because it's actually the vocals on it are quite different from the other vocals of the period. He sounds quite different sounding. What was it, aged Paul, and it's very reflective really about Heather Mills in terms of how she got hounded by the media, and he's sort of wondering what's going to happen to her, and that's quite a touching song really.
You think his vocals were that way because he was responding to what was going on with his relationship with Heather?
No, I think Nitin must have just encouraged him to be raw in terms of his sound and that, because it's it's a sort of very different from the vocals you get on Memory Almost Full or that. So it's just not quite sure in terms of how he got such a sound, but he was going for a different sound, because Nitin saw his albums again, they're quite atmospheric really in terms of their production, and it's so he, because he mixes a bit of Indian music with British music and that, so quite a quite an interesting song really.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we're going to wrap things up a little bit, but before we do, I wanted to bring up the fact that Memory Almost Full, Paul really did quite a lot to promote it. And even though I was aware of some of the gigs that he did for it, um, they're all summarized here in your book. And it's kind of extraordinary just to have been at any one of these concerts. You have the Electric Ballroom, Highline Ballroom, of course, Amoeba Music, the record store, iTunes Festival, the Olympia in Paris, and Electric Proms. I mean,
Yeah.
right there, he could have made a documentary on all those concerts. That's quite a lot right there.
Yeah, oh yeah. But again, it's because he in 2007 he changed music companies to hear music, and I think they had new ideas in terms of how to promote his music instead of the old route of doing it all through record shops and radio and that. He ought to be obviously moved into coffee shops with Starbucks
Yeah.
and getting I suppose getting interest through doing these small gigs, which would be covered in the local press or get onto social media and that. And I don't think I don't think he repeated that with the new album, did he? But this is quite unusual in terms of what he did. And I think one of the other YouTubers, Beat Lee Tone, I think he said he was at I think it was at the Electric the Roundhouse gig as well.
Right.
So it's an opportunity to see Paul uh, pretty close, really, compared to his 50,000 seater concerts he does nowadays.
Yeah. Well, those of us who have been privileged to be at any of these real intimate shows, and I've been to a few, I just, consider myself pretty lucky.
Yes. I mean, I think quite a few of those have got been recorded. Some of them are were on the extra tracks on the later release of Memory Almost
Right.
Full, and obviously there are bootlegs out there with these things as well.
Speaking of which, in 2008, Paul did some special concerts, one in the Ukraine, and also in Tel Aviv, Israel, in Quebec for their 400th anniversary concert. And I wasn't aware that after Russia invaded Ukraine a couple of years ago, Paul and MPL were petitioned to release the concert that they did in the Ukraine to benefit Ukrainian refugees. That would have been a nice gesture if he could have done that.
Yes, it's because I suppose it's a bit might be a bit of a sore point in terms of in 2000 and was it 2004 he went to Russia for the
Yes.
concert in Red Square, and then and then he went to St. Petersburg and stayed in the palace and that, and he was Putin was very sort of friendly with him and that, and I suppose even at that time Putin had done some things in Chechnya, which was a sign of things to come, really. So I don't know whether he was a bit naive in being so close to Putin. Although at the time, I suppose a lot of people were hoping that Putin would modernize Russia and bring it into the Western fold, and unfortunately, that's not happened really. But
Mm.
yeah, it would be a good thing to release this concert just to support the Ukrainian people. Yeah.
I wonder how Paul looks back at that time when he was, spending time with Putin and being friends with him.
Yes, I mean, I suppose he wasn't the only. A lot of artists were going to Russia. I think Ringo Starr got there a year before him. I think, but
Sure.
yeah,
All right. I should also point out in your book, you do have your own playlist of what you consider to be. They're either your favorites, or do you think these are the best songs from this period?
well, I mean, I think it's really from the albums the best songs, but in terms of coverage of the whole period, if you want to get a good coverage of the whole period, I was actually listening to the playlist a couple of days ago, and it's quite it is some very strong music, starting from Rush's Run Devil Run all the way through to it is a final track from a film movie because he did a couple of film movie tracks.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you were doing the top 20, then you probably pick a few more tracks from Chaos and Creation and Memory Almost Full. But I think I've got three or four tracks from each of those albums, and 20 tracks in all. Yeah.
It's definitely a great list right here. I'm glad you put Vanilla Sky in there because
Yes,
I don't know too many people that are crazy about that song as I am.
no, I just love the film actually, but I prefer the Spanish version. The original version was much better.
Yeah. And I do love the film music that you were just talking
Yeah,
about. Want to Come Home is to me a great song. Um, yeah, I love Hope for the Future, although that was for a video game.
yeah, so,
In the Blink of an Eye is really a good song too. So
yeah. So, he also did song with Heather. Heather did a charity song for I think in 2000, is it 2001, 2002 for her.
uh,
Um, I think it's called what's it called? It's to
okay.
anti disability
Yeah.
song and that where Paul does a bit of almost a bit of rapping in the background on that. And he's done a cycling song as well for the Paul McCartney cycling team as well, which is an interesting one as well.
The man does a little bit of everything.
And Meat Free Monday is the other one, I
Oh,
think.
all right. So Ian, your book is called Macca and the Long Noughties.
That's it. Naughty is only one meaning. It's not double meaning now.
Yeah. And you can pick this up on Amazon. And
Yes.
if there's any other links you want me to provide to my listeners here, we'll put that in the description box.
Yeah, I think most places you should be able to get it on Kobo, is it Kobo, Barnes and Noble, Apple, all those types of places, really. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for spending time here
Yes.
on my channel.
Yeah.
And of course, thanks to all of you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. And we'll see you real soon. Okay.
Right.
Thanks so much, Ian.
Thank you.